Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. This is Valley Beth Shalom live and online. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. Welcome to Shabbat Morning Torah Study. I'd like to welcome my friends and colleagues, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch of the American Jewish University and Rabbi Marc Gellman of Golf Digest magazine. So it's one of his prides.
It's my golf game right now.
There you go.
That's all I can do.
We're delighted to welcome you this morning. And hope that you're taking good care of yourselves and staying safe through this crisis. This is, I think, our fourth or fifth week together online on this platform, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to share this conversation with so many people around the world. So welcome, Marc, and welcome, Sherre. This morning, the Torah portion that is assigned to this week is Tazria Metzora, the middle of the book of Leviticus. It begins with a set of laws dealing with the birth of children and the impurity that is associated with the birth of children, as there is impurity associated with all sorts of physical functions in the book of Leviticus. And then it proceeds to a long discussion of Metzora, which is sometimes translated as leprosy, but it's probably not what we medically call leprosy. It's a set of conditions that appeared on the skin of people, sometimes in buildings and other venues, sometimes on clothing, some sort of a mold or some sort of a growth. And that scared the community, and that indicated that a person is infected with something. So even though this is the Torah portion that every rabbi in America proceeds and prefers to ignore and to talk about something else, it turns out that this year it may be the most relevant Torah portion of all. Sherre, as you read this Torah, usually so irrelevant, what strikes you as important this time?
So thank you, Rabbi Feinstein. Nice to see you, Rabbi Gellman, even virtually. What I cannot believe is that this is truly the bizarre world. Every rabbi dreads Tazria Metzora. It's like, oh God, that bar mitzvah portion. Oh God, we've got to talk about it. And this year, I can't think of a more timely Torah portion. And Yitzchak Feder, who's at the University of Haifa, wrote this incredible article paralleling COVID with Tazria Metzora, being a Metzora. And he puts it into four categories, which is first the diagnosis, right? That we diagnose this illness. Then there's the quarantine or isolation. Oh, I'm sorry, forget it. First, there is the diagnosis or the examination, then the diagnosis, then the quarantine, and then the purification. And the similarities between what we're experiencing today is shocking. So we examined what was the illness, then we have this isolation, and now we have this possibility of what are we supposed to learn from this whole process and what does it mean to us? And I think there's a lot to learn.
Yeah. Oh. I think that there is a lot to learn, but sometimes it's in the opposition of the Torah's wisdom to our current wisdom. In the Torah, they isolate the sick one, the one who's afflicted with the skin mold or whatever they called tzarat, and they isolated them, and the rest of the community was okay. In our approach, through our public health officials, we're doing exactly the opposite. We're quarantining the entire world, in effect, and that's the opposite of what the Torah does. In fact, the Torah's time for quarantine is exactly what our time is, which is 14 days. Same thing. But I think the Torah's wisdom is actually more sound, and this protest against the forced shutdown of the world economy, I think, reinforces that. In the Torah, the people who need to be taken away are the people who threaten the community's health. And in our world, we're shutting down the whole economy that enables society to live. And that, I think, is something we have to reflect on, whether shutting down the entire world makes sense, as opposed to a more biblically oriented public health policy, which would be people like me who have a target on their back, old people with comorbidity factors, basically old golfers, that we are the ones who should be put aside and quarantined, and everyone else should be allowed to go on with a sort of limited life at least. So I find those contradictions very interesting.
Well, but the problem is that the disease is different. In the Torah, you diagnose the disease by seeing it. So the symptoms appear first. The problem with COVID-19, the reason it's a unique virus, is that you have asymptomatic transmission. A person could be walking around with this disease, not have any symptoms, and not know they're walking around with the disease. Right. So it's great. You know, your grandkid, Gellman, can go to nursery school, pick up the disease, and kiss you good Shabbos and give you a death sentence, God forbid. That's the reason why the quarantine has to be the other way around.
Right. And the examination in the Bible was completely reliant on the symptoms that the person showed, right? They had to look at the tza'arat. They had to look at the disease on them. We don't have that benefit. We can't see what we don't know. And so we can't be the priest diagnosing. We have to take larger precautions, but we're doing quarantine within quarantine too, Rabbi Gellman. We're quarantining the healthy, and then we're quarantining within the healthy, the sick.
I want to look at the broader issue here, though. One of the broader issues is the stigmatization of disease, because even the rabbis of the Talmud, when they read this section, read the word Metzora, which is the name of the disease in the Bible, as a synonym for Motzi Shem Ra, for the person who spreads gossip. And in the story of Miriam, when Miriam spreads gossip about her brother Moshe, speaking ill about her sister-in-law, she is afflicted with the disease. She's afflicted with this Metzora, and Moses prays for her, and she gets better, and the story continues. And we tend to do the same thing, because disease has such a random, chaotic nature, and we human beings want to impose order on everything. So it's so much easier to look at the sick person, and instead of recognizing that the sick person, was just in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong microbes, we look at the sick person and say, it's your own damn fault. It's your own damn fault. And even with this disease, by the way, it's happening now, and it's going to happen more when people are going to say, well, if you had worn the mask, you wouldn't have gotten sick. If you had taken care of yourself, you wouldn't have gotten sick. And we do this. I remember with the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, there was a tremendous move to blame gay people for the disease and lay it as a moral judgment, as a sort of punishment from heaven on people, which is a despicable, obscene moral accusation. So how do you say to people, there's randomness in the world, and I know it's difficult to deal with, but that's the way we need to understand this, instead of casting a stigma.
I just don't see that either. I don't see that happening in this disease. Maybe you're reading other articles or watching other channels, but I don't see that people who get sick from COVID-19 are being stigmatized or being blamed. The AIDS issue was very different. The AIDS issue definitely affected a group in the society where there was an ongoing issue among some people about their lifestyle, not from me, but from others. And the fact of the matter is, I don't see that in this case. And I don't see people saying, if you have the disease, you did something wrong. I think there's a wisdom, a common moral intuition that people have that is very important. And I don't think that it's occurring now. Maybe, are you really seeing instances where people who are sick with the COVID are being stigmatized?
For sure. I see people saying—
Where do you see that?
You see people saying you shouldn't have been traveling, you should have been more careful, you shouldn't have been putting yourself out there. I think we are so uncomfortable with ambiguity, and that is not a current day problem. That is a life problem. I think about why the rabbis made shellfish treif was—
They did? Whoa, what?
Yes. Yes.
We haven't got to that chapter yet.
Oh my God.
I always think about it because they
didn't have that in rabbinical school when I went there.
the ambiguity was so upsetting. They couldn't figure out if it was meat or dairy. So the ambiguity made them force it into a category of, I'm going to name it as other. And I think for sure during this time of COVID, in my neighborhood, we started walking around and people stopped saying hello to each other. And I think it was a fear of, I might catch this disease from you. I think there's just ambiguity makes us want to figure out a reason, and the reason is to blame. That is a human instinct.
Yeah. Do you see the stigmatization?
Yeah. Human beings cannot stand randomness. They cannot stand chaos. They have to impose an order on chaos. And when you have to recognize that this disease strikes everybody equally, and it strikes everyone indiscriminately. That's so hard to believe. So if I impose a moral chaos, a moral framework on the chaos, then I can stand in a certain place of protection. It gives me an imagined control, a fantasy of control over a situation that I deep down know I have no way of controlling. Frankly, look, I think the book of Leviticus buys this in a much bigger way. The book of Leviticus was put into the Torah after the destruction of the Holy Temple. And so the Jewish people are experiencing a terrible sense of the chaos and randomness of history. And so they put into the Torah a book which is so tightly controlled. I mean, let's read the book. It's all about the rules, and the rules are so detailed. Here you get rules about what do you do if you give birth to a boy, and what do you do if you give birth to a girl, and most of all, rules that things that are inside the body must stay inside the body, and things that are outside the body have to, stay outside. And it's a very, very controlled book. It's trying to reimpose control, order into a situation which is psychologically untenable, a situation of chaos. Let's move to something slightly different. If there's one thing that's going to come out of this crisis that's positive, it's that we're finally recognizing that doctors and nurses and those who engage in healthcare are really heroes. We're really very heroic. There was a time when we were young, Marc and I remember this, when doctors were, Marcus Welby and Dr. Kildare, these were gods. And the family doctor was a family, a wise old friend who came to your house when you had the flu and took care of you. Doctors were once looked upon with tremendous reverence in our culture. And then we went all the way to the other side and turned them into healthcare providers, which is a sort of vending machine of medicine and advice. And they lost a great deal of the reverence and respect that we once had for them. I think this crisis has brought them back to a central focus in our culture as people who are deeply committed to the health and well-being of their patients, and giving a certain amount of self-sacrifice, in this case, a tremendous amount of self-sacrifice, in order to stand in that space between healing and disease, between hurt and recovering. And that role of the healer is emphasized in the Torah, because in the Torah it's the Kohen. Marc, we need to respect doctors again?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You may be missing the transition that occurred in the middle there, where doctors became sex symbols. In ER and all of the TV series where doctors were the heroes. And I'm very, very vulnerable to this whole theory of yours that they're heroes, because my hero is my brother, who is doing all the surgeries now in the middle of this pandemic in New York and on Long Island. And I'm terrified for his health. And he's just an extraordinary man. And he's having trouble day by day just dealing with the catastrophe of sick people. He said, Marc, I'm seeing people who are sicker than anyone I've seen as a doctor. And I'm seeing people, this was now a couple of weeks ago, it seems to have leveled off, and God willing, it's declining a little in New York now. But he said, I've seen people where the only thing we could say to them was, go home and die, because we can't do anything for you here. We don't have the resources here, or there's nothing we can do. And the people they're putting on the ventilators, these ventilators that they seem to indicate were kind of the cure for everything. 80% of them, he said, of his patients who went on the ventilators never came off.
Yeah.
They died on the ventilator. So his life is a living hell right now. He comes home every night exhausted after long shifts. He rips off his scrubs, throws them in the garbage, runs into the shower, and just hopes that he's not bringing home a bug. So yes, they are true heroes. There's no question about it. And
you guys think you're older than you are, because I remember at Hanukkah time, we used to prepare gifts for our physicians. I still remember Dr. Klein and bringing my pediatrician his gift. So you're not as old as you think you are. But what I would say is that there was a transition.
I'm as old as I think I am. I'm older than I think I am, actually.
But there was a transition into what I would call celebrity culture, which it was no longer that you wanted to grow up to be a doctor, but you wanted to grow up to be Beyonce or J-Lo or famous or rich. And I think what's been fascinating now is that celebrity culture is irrelevant. And you see the celebrities are sort of like, they're not worshiped. Kids aren't talking about them in the same way. They're being much more criticized because their messaging isn't impactful. It's not important. And it's not to discount actors and actresses. I have a lot of friends and I respect them. But I think one of the upsides is bringing back the people that do good work on a daily basis. And I would add teachers to that. I have 4 kids in 4 digital schools at home. And these teachers get up every morning. And I can tell you, my kids are not like, yay, get up at 8:30 to see my teacher. Of course, I'm jumping out of bed. And I see them conducting scavenger hunts and putting on hats and trying to keep it relevant and interesting. And I think it brought back the importance of people that really do God's work on a daily basis.
Let me bring up an issue that is bothering me deeply, though, and that connects to Tazria Metzora and to the present crisis. And that is, in Tazria Metzora, the priest was a religious leader and a public health official. He was the same. It was the same person, which means that the message was that Judaism is not only going to make you spiritually healthy, it's going to make you physically healthy if you do this stuff. All right. So now we have a situation where the ultra-orthodox in Israel and in New York are gathering in complete violation. Not all of them, thank God, but too many of them at weddings, at funerals, and other, violating social distancing. In Israel, this is a huge problem, particularly in the ultra-Orthodox communities. And what they've done is they have not learned the lesson of the tradition of Judaism that they seem to represent in other ways. And that is that God wants us to live by these commandments. V'chai b'hem, and v'nin shmarta ma'od et nafshetechem. Guard your soul diligently. So I think there is moral blame to be cast in America to the kids who went down for spring break to Florida in violation of those rules, but also in our community. There are ultra-Orthodox Jews who are not learning the lesson of public health, and that is deeply embarrassing to me. And they need to be called out by other religious leaders, because there is a view, a terrible view that we all suffer. We all live under the burden of this view, and that is that they are the real Jews. And we're just some kind of knockoff of what they are. And I don't believe that. I don't believe it for a second. I mean, their behavior during this crisis is morally obscene.
Absolutely, but I'll tell you what's interesting, Marc. It's certainly obscene. What's interesting, though, is that they are, even in the Heredia communities in Israel, in Bnei Brak and Mea Shearim, they represent a small minority, even among the Heredia community. What's remarkable is that the majority of the Heredia community has really understood this crisis and adopted the public health rules. In fact, there was a report just yesterday that Rabbi Kanievsky, who is the biggest gadol in the ultra-Orthodox world, he told his yeshiva students to return to yeshiva And all of his lieutenants, all of his the Rashi Yeshiva gathered around him and said, no. They contradicted their Rebbe, which never happens in that world. But it happened here. And here's what's remarkable. Judaism, especially in its extreme versions, like most Western religions in their extremes versions, has had an adversarial relationship with science. When the Lubavitcher Rebbe was once asked whether he believed in evolution, and he said, of course not. The Torah says the world was created in 6 days. And they asked him why there are fossils. And he said, God put the fossils into the world to fool the atheists, right? That's the sort of animosity between traditional religion and empirical science. If the exception has always been medicine, that because of, you said, the mitzvah of chai behem, of live by these commandments, the sanctity of life has always been an exception. So the irony is, or the interesting paradox is, that you'll have, like, for example, in Mea Sharim, you have Shaare Tzedek Hospital, an ultra-Orthodox modern hospital in Jerusalem. And Jews who do not accept the science on which the medicine they're taking is based will still go to that hospital and ask for healing from those doctors. If you get sick, you'll recite Tehillim, you'll ask God for healing, but only after you go see the specialist.
But so it's like the commandment, Eddie, it's like the commandment in Talmudic and Rabbinic Judaism, Rapo Yirapeh, you shall heal, you shall heal. That double repetition of the word heal is not to say that God was stuttering, but rather that the rabbis read that as you will give doctors the empowerment to heal, which I think is always so interesting, because it's like, wait a minute, it's not just we're waiting for God to hand us a miracle, but actually we're waiting for other humans to use science to create health, which is what you're saying.
Well, there's a limit here. And, I love your defense of the community. And as I said, I know that this isn't the whole Orthodox community. It isn't even the whole Haredi community that is acting in this obscene way. But the truth of the matter is that the opposition of the Haredi community and its leaders to what they call limudei chol, secular learning, which includes learning of medicine, is so profound that they will never, ever be able to understand science and never be able to heal themselves, because they can't be doctors. The doctors who are healing them are part of another strain of orthodoxy, which you well know, which is modern orthodoxy. Those are the Orthodox Jews who are not opposed to secular learning, to scientific learning. And they are, among them, the best Jews I know. But the fact of the matter is, this plague has shown us, again, the moral blindness, the scientific blindness of Jewish communities that are opposed to secular learning.
Well, I hate to put myself in the position of defending Haredim against you, which is such an irony, actually. But I'm going to do that. Part of the problem is that at the same time that the news reports about these Haredi communities ignoring the public health rules and gathering in large groups during the pandemic, at the same time that those news reports came out, everybody in the known world was watching this program Unorthodox on Netflix. I'm sure that you've seen it. And so there's this real desire to bash the ultra-Orthodox. So, and I don't disagree with you, Marc, of course, a community that closes its eyes to the outside world and to the wisdom of the nations, because it believes that Torah itself exhausts all that human beings ought to know, that's not only morally wrong, it's Jewishly wrong. I mean, the Rambam, who's the greatest rabbi who ever lived, was the best doctor in the world, and wrote treatises on mathematics and astronomy. And the rabbinic heroes were all people who lived in the world. The idea that you can close your mind and close your heart and close your eyes to the world and have nothing to do with it. I'm encouraged, however, here's my defense, by a phenomenon which is in Israel, and it's growing in Israel, and I think it's going to grow even faster and under the influence of this crisis, which is a phenomenon of Haredi Le'umi, of nationalist Haredim, who recognize you can't do this anymore. We can't live outside of the world. We have to live as part of this society, support this society. We have to make a living. Men can't sit in yeshiva 24 hours a day. The very, very few who have earned that right because of their brilliance as students, they have a right to do that in the same way that in our world, a guy can get a postdoc, postdoctoral fellowship and sit in the University of Oxford library for years at a time. But most of them need to go to work. And you find that in these Haredi Le'umi, these young Haredi communities, a new push to go to work, to serve in the army, and to learn technologies which will give them an opportunity to make a living in the world, but also opens them to a contact with the world. I think there's a revolution going on within that Haredi world. It's slow, and I think this crisis is going to bring it to the surface in a very powerful way.
I hope so, God willing.
Well, and there I am defending the Haredi world. You heard it first.
No, I don't think it's defending the Haredi world, even though that's the Peshat, that's the surface. I actually think it's the belief that the Jewish people really do want to b'chai b'chem, to live. And that I think it's an optimism that's very compelling, Rabbi Feinstein, that Jews will come to a place where that will drive them no matter what sect they're from.
So, Sherre, let me ask you this. You and I and Marc as well have always had this experience. Many rabbis do. Someone will come to us and say, my loved one is very sick. Rabbi, I want you to pray for them.
Right.
I want you to pray for them. So help us, Sherre, help us understand what's the role of medicine and what's the role of prayer? What's the role of science and chemistry? And what's the role of God and the transcendent world?
So I love that you brought up that example, Rabbi Feinstein, because people do come all the time and say, pray for me, Rabbi, as if I have some direct line that they don't have. And what I always say to them is that I will pray with you, but I won't pray for you in the way that you're expecting. Because I think there is spiritual healing and there's physical healing. And I pray for the doctors to have the skills. Like I pray, Marc, for your brother to truly have the courage each day to face whatever comes, to use his science, to use his wisdom, to be skilled as a doctor, as a Jewish prayer, as an act of spirituality, and as an act of the intersection of spirituality and science together. Because to me, they're one and the same. Granted, I married a doctor.
Gellman, what do you say when someone says, pray for me or pray for my loved one, they should get well?
Yeah, I pray for them. I pray for them. And I think I had Sherry's view for many, many years of my rabbinate. And then I met Tom Hartman, the priest, and he helped me to kind of think through this idea. There is a belief that God heals us. Now, even the rabbis understood that it's the physicians who heal us. And in their commentaries on Rapo Yirapeh and Healing You Shall Surely Heal, they talk about how the physician is the hands of God. So that's how I interpret my prayer directly for their healing, not with them, and not to, at their time of despair, to say to them, what do you want from me? I don't have any magical powers. I think I learned that what they want from us is a connection to a real God who really heals. Heals through physicians, heals through medicine, heals through other spiritual and non-spiritual means, but definitely it is God who is doing this. And I think when rabbis say, look, I don't have magical powers, don't ask me to do this, they're cutting someone off unnecessarily. That's what Tommy helped me to understand. You're taking someone who's dying of thirst and you're saying, look, what do you want from me? I don't have any water here. I think we have to be more brave and more affirming
I
in
actually think the
in our
opposite.
direct ability to say, I will pray that God will heal you.
I don't think we're cutting them off. What we're doing is we're empowering them to own their relationship with God and not defer it to someone else. I don't think it's about saying, I'm not available to you. It's about saying, I can't be for you you have the same relationship with God that I do. I think it's empowering for people. It's not saying, I'm uninterested. It's saying, let me help you find your direct connection.
Look, I love you, and I agree with everything you say except this. I tell you, there are people in this world. I think, Eddie, you're one of them. Tom Hartman was one of them. I was privileged, and I am privileged to know the Dalai Lama. He was part of our HBO special, and he wrote a foreword to our book, one of our books. And I'm telling you, there are certain people in the world who do have a special connection, Sherre. They do. And they have a better connection? Yes. They have a more direct connection. Why is that? That's above my pay grade. Why is it the case that some people are spiritual geniuses? Their compassion, their kindness, their goodness connect to God. It's like saying everyone can paint. Yes, everyone can paint, but not everyone can paint like Picasso. Picasso had a quality, and so when you say, look, everyone can make a picture. No, it's not true. Everyone can sing music or make music. Yes, but not everyone is Beethoven. There are Beethovens of the spirit. There are Picassos of the spirit.
So play that out, Marc.
And they are healers. And they are healers.
Play that out. You say to someone, you know what? There are Picassos and there's painters, and then there's people that paint by numbers. Frankly, you're a paint by numbers person, so you want to defer it over to someone greater. I can't play that out as a rabbi.
What I would ask you to do, the proof of this is really visual. I live not so far from the Rebbe's grave in New York. And I would, when I was there for another funeral, and occasionally when I was driving by, I would drive in to Old Montefiore Cemetery, and I would go to his grave. And if you go to the grave, you see all these kvitlach, all these little pieces of paper, all the prayers. You could see them at the wall as well, of course. But I ask you to think about those pieces of paper. One way to look at them is these poor, ignorant, benighted people. They're writing prayers to a dead guy. And what is he going to do? That's one way to see it. But another way to see it, I think, that is more honest to the spiritual truth of the matter, is that the Rebbe, for all of his nonsense about the creation of the world, the Rebbe was a spiritual genius. And the Dalai Lama is a spiritual genius. And John Paul II was a spiritual genius. Occasionally there are people who emerge in the world, and I don't think it's anti-rational to say we acknowledge this, and we lift up their unique gifts, and those gifts include the gift of healing.
So I spent many years with a person I consider a spiritual genius, with Harold Schulweis,
Yeah.
and having spent years with him, and then having worked on his biography, his journey is an interesting one. So he starts out as a Kaplanian, as a purely rationalist, naturalist, scientific-minded rabbi who would have dismissed those kvittelach as superstition, absolutely. And then Harold, unfortunately, was cursed with a bad heart, and ended up having 3 very, very major heart events, heart attacks, and then bypass surgeries, and then bypass surgeries. And something changed in him by those events. He would speak. He spoke about it in 1986. He gave one of his most profound sermons, because while Schulweis was this amazing mind and could lead you on a journey, a cerebral journey into a Judaism of intellectuality. In 1986, when he spoke about his heart event and going into this hospital and having the surgery, he spoke from his heart. And people were so moved by this because the rabbi that had been so cerebral really opened himself. This is when he started writing poetry, because he started acknowledging that the fear he felt going into that surgery, the fear he felt, the loss of control, the loss of a future that he felt going into that surgery, and the pain and the strangeness of a surgical experience really changed the way he thought. And now his reconciliation of your two wonderful ideas, he would speak about, of course, the God within. And that when we pray, we are praying, in fact, and Marc is right about this, we are praying for a transcendent power to help us. But that transcendent power is not above, it's actually within. It's that each of us has powers of healing we don't understand and we can't quite fathom. And that the purpose of prayer, and here Sherry's right, the purpose of prayer is not looking up above to a God who's going to cast down healing or hurt on me from above. The purpose of prayer is to locate my own powers of healing and the powers of healing that exist between us, between doctor and patient, between nurse and patient. And by the way, I want to say a word about nurses here, yes, because while doctors are geniuses and they know an enormous amount of biochemistry, it's the nurse who holds your hand when your life is falling apart. And it's the nurse who comforts you and brings you strength and is there when you push that little button. Schulweis would speak about the healing that exists in the realm of the between I and thou, in the between. And that's where and when he prayed for healing, that's where he located that prayer. And he insisted, Marc, much like you, they insisted that prayer works and that he would lead people in that prayer. Now, Sherry, you would interpret that by saying that when we pray in the traditional liturgy, Rifuat HaNefesh, Rifuat HaGuf, and it's interesting that it's in that order, healing of the spirit and healing of the body. Rifuat HaGuf, healing of the body, is a cure. It's a medical, biochemical process. But Rifuat HaNefesh is all of the internal powers that we bring to that moment of disease that give us strength to be able to endure it, to find the wisdom in this moment, to find meaning in these moments, to find strength and friendship in these moments, and to find the internal power to want to go on living. I can tell you, as a cancer patient, how many times I was so tempted just to pull the IVs out of my arm. And when I finished my second course of chemotherapy, the nurses all came over and they gave me a certificate. And I said, "What the hell is this?" And they said, "Well, you finished the course of treatment." I said, "Well, I had no choice." They said, "No, most men don't finish it." I said, "I didn't even know I had a choice." They said, "No, we're very proud that you finished it." You have to find something inside in order to find the power to heal. And that's one of the functions of prayer, is to help you find that inside, and we can share that with each other. There's a transfusion of healing from one person to another. Sure.
And I would name that as your godliness, right? Yeah. That's what I ask people to tap into. Yeah. That courage that it took for you to continue, that you saw was obvious, is actually your divinity. So, I'm a Kaplanian at heart.
Well, it was also fear of my wife, because if I came home and told her I'm not taking the medicine, she'd have killed me. Sherry, Marc, before we finish, I want to mark the fact that this coming week we celebrate the 72nd Yom Ha'atzmaut. It's the 72nd birthday of the State of Israel. This moment of it. Now, I actually want to ask you a very silly question. I don't want to talk theology. We did that last week, the theology of Israel. I want to ask you for a very simple moment. I want you to tell me your favorite place in Israel. The place that in Israel, when you've been to Israel and you go to that place, it feels like, now I'm here. This is the Israel that I love. Sherry, you want to start?
No, I don't want to start because I have so many. So I want Marc to start.
Marc, go ahead. Tell us your favorite place in Israel.
There's an absorption center, Metzora, outside of Jerusalem, and that's my favorite place because it was the place where the Beta Yisrael, the Falasha Jews were first brought, and I don't feel anywhere else in Israel like that, except there, because I remember a kid in the Gan Yoadim there in this absorption center, a beautiful black kid who had a yarmulke on, and that still never ceases to strike me as somewhere in the range of incongruous and what, really? And he was terrific. And his little kid was named Moshe. That was obviously not his name in Ethiopia, but this was his name there. And he was drawing a crayon picture of a dog, and the dog in his picture was smiling. And I asked him in Hebrew, why is the dog smiling, Moshe, in your picture? And he looked up at me with these beautiful eyes, and he said, the dog is smiling because I don't have to eat him. And I said a prayer to God, not the God within me, not the God between me and anyone else, but the God who is beyond me. And I said, thank you for this place, God. Thank you for this place. And that's my favorite place in Israel.
Thank you, Marc. Sherre, what's your favorite place in Israel? Just one.
So as you asked that question, I was flooded with all these places in Israel that I've had incredibly spiritual and powerful moments. But the one that kept coming up, I didn't want to say. And I keep trying to push it away. And I'm going to share this with my aunt and uncle. My cousins, who I'm extremely close with, live in Ramat Sharon. And when I was 21 years old, I went to Israel for the year. And every weekend I came and I had my room in their house. And it was the first time truly in my life that I felt utterly safe, which is ironic because everybody thinks Israel's so dangerous. But it was the first time I felt so safe in the world. And I talk to my cousins pretty much daily. And my cousin's daughter now lives in my room and she's redecorated it. And recently when I was in Israel, I said, Amy, I'm not comfortable with the colors that you've chosen for my room. And she's a 16-year-old and she started laughing and she said, at what point does it become my room? So I think that, as crazy as it sounds, it's in the home of my cousins in Ramat Sharon. There's just no place I'd rather be most of the time. And I love them so much. So
thank you. Please wish them Yom Ha'atzmaut Sameach. My parents both grew up in the Hashomer Tzayir youth movement. My father in Los Angeles, my mother in Newark. In this summer, I guess, of 1948, my father hitchhiked to New Jersey, and my mother came down from Newark, and they came to Heightstown, New Jersey, where the Shomer had a hakshara. It had a farm to train American kids to be chalutzim, to be pioneers and build Israel. And my parents were part of a garin, part of a group that was scheduled to go to Israel in 1950. So my father came there. That's where he trained to be a baker. And my mother came there and she trained to be a dictator, basically, the leader of the kibbutz. And that's where they met. My father actually came with his girlfriend at the time. They hitchhiked, and my mother they met there. And 6 weeks before they were supposed to be shipped out, that's how they got married. My father heard that if you go as a single man, you sleep in a dorm on a cot. And he feared that if you go as a married couple, you get a dira, you get a room with a bed. So he went to my mother on pragmatic basis, proposed marriage. So they went to Newark, got married in the basement of the shul, had one night at the Taft Hotel, and then went back to work. They went to Israel, and they starved. My father was the baker on a kibbutz, and he literally starved. He was my daddy's a big guy. He was 129 pounds. He was starving. And for 3 years, they lived in Israel starving. And finally, there was a big mashber. There was a big crisis on the kibbutz, and they were on the wrong side of the politics. So they came home to America. But they told us stories all the time about how they were starving in Israel. So when we came to Israel in 1970 on a family trip, my father went to Super Sol. I said, Dad, you want to go to the Kotel? You want to go see the wall? Do you want to go see the Israel Museum? You want to see the Dead Sea Scrolls? And no, he wanted to go to Super Sol because he wanted to see food. So my favorite place in Israel is Machane Yehuda. which is the great big open air market in Jerusalem. And what I love to do, and it drives my wife nuts, is I go to Machane Yehuda early in the morning when it's full of people, and the vendors are shouting at you, avatiach, watermelon and cheese and chalva and spices, and I just take it all in. Eretz zavat chalav udvash, a land that truly, genuinely flows with milk and honey, the faces of people from every corner of the world speaking Hebrew, preparing for Shabbat, and all of the beauty and bounty of this country that has been built since my parents started building it long, long ago. That's my favorite place. And the Bible says, you know, ve'achalta ve'savata uve'rachta. You eat and you're satisfied, and you give thanks to God. So this week we give thanks to God for the gifts of the state of Israel, for the strength and fortitude of the people of Israel, and for the gifts of the God of Israel to all of us. Thank you, Sherre. Thank you, Marc. Thank you to everyone. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Amen.